The weather report outside of Philadelphia right now is currently thunder showers.
Retake.
Hey everybody, welcome into this Photoshop tutorial brought to you by tutvid.com. Today we're going to take a look at this pretty cool pixel dispersion effect. It's really neat. We're going to add like a 3D element to it by sort of faking depth in our photo. And it's a really versatile effect. It's an effect that once you know how to do it, you can apply it to anything, not just people. We're going to do it to a model, but you can apply this to cars, buildings, any kind of environmental effect you want, or even like text or graphical elements if you're working in a strictly graphic design type application. Before we jump into the tutorial, I want to remind you guys I'm selling a course over on tutvid.com. A link just appeared, I don't know, somewhere over there. Go check it out. You don't have to buy it if you don't want. I'm just asking you to go check it out. Just checking it out helps support the site. And if you pick it up, of course, that helps support the site even more. And for that, I would be greatly appreciative. But let's go ahead and get into this tutorial and get started with this thing sooner rather than later. All right, so this is the finished effect right here. As we look at this, we can see that it's kind of like her dress completely fragmenting and spinning around her. Cool. It's composed of all these layers in this layer group. I'm not going to go through them now because it'll just get complicated. But like I said, this is not something that we only can apply to people. It can be applied to other effects. We can apply blurs and make it look like either the car is exploding or maybe all these bits and pieces are shooting together to, form this car from the mere vapors of the air or whatever. And we also have here an athlete who's leaping through the air, and you can see the ball is kind of fragmenting, and so is he. And there's just so much you can do with this. It's such a versatile effect. So let's jump over here to our image and get started with this. Now, the first thing I want to do, once you have your photo, and by the way, this particular effect seems to work best when you have a solid color background. However, you can apply it to other types of images, as I did with the car photo and as I did with the football or soccer player. The key is going to be we need to cut the person out of the background and then be able to fill in behind where they were. So you're going to see we're going to do this with her in just a second where we actually fill in the background, and that's kind of important. So just know that whatever background or whatever image you're using, it doesn't necessarily have to be a photo shot in studio, but the photo shot in studio certainly are the easiest to do because there's a less kind of patching and healing and cloning that would have to go on behind where the person was. Let's get back to the video, and I'll explain in more detail. All right, so we're just going to double-click our background layer. It's going to unlock it. Hit OK. There we go. Great. And we want to extend the image out to the right. So we're going to go ahead and choose Image, Canvas Size, and I'm going to change the width from 4872 to a straight 8000. Now, the other thing we want to do is set our center point over here to the left, so all of the image gets pushed out to the right. Hit OK. You can see, voila, everything is pushed out to the right. Now, I think what we're going to try first is using content-aware scale and see how that does for us. And if it's even reasonably good, we're just going to keep it. So I'm going to grab the rectangular marquee tool. I'm going to make a selection like this. Maybe I'll shift it over just a smidge. And there we go, just like that. And then we'll go edit. Oh, we'll go edit. There we go, content-aware scale. And then I'm just going to pull this over this way. And you can see it's definitely stretching the pixels, quite a bit. But I think this is going to be covered up well enough that you're not really going to be able to notice. If it's really, really bugging us, one of the things we could do is reselect or reload that selection. By the way, that's this Command-Shift or Control-Shift-D hotkey, really useful. And then we'll go select, modify, feather, and we'll feather our selection by 40 pixels, and we can just throw some noise over this. Go filter noise, add noise, and we're adding it right to the background layer. So we only want to add maybe 2 or 3%, if that. Well, maybe more. Maybe let's try 5. Whoop, not 35, 5. Yeah, there we go. So just adds a little bit of noise. It's going to help just kind of break up some of the pixelation, but you can still definitely tell there's a difference between the original background and that. Don't worry, you can spend as much time fussing with the background as you want. In fact, maybe once we cut her out, we'll just replace the side of the background that she's on with something similar to this, so at least the background looks somewhat consistent. Again, It's totally up to you what you do. It's totally up to you what you do with the background. So we're going to go ahead and make a selection of her. We really want to cut out her, the little watering can she has, the flowers, and maybe even a little bit of the shadows beneath the bottom of the dress here. So the way I'm going to do this, and I'm going to speed this up to hyperspeed while I shoot through this, but I'm simply going to use the quick selection tool, and we could even enter into the new select and mask workspace and attempt to make our selection that way. Again, this is all going to depend just on the type of object you're selecting. If it's something with a lot of long straight edges, maybe using the pen tool would be easiest, and then you can just convert that path to a selection. If it's something like this where there's a lot of intricate detail, all these flowers, her hair, everything, maybe select and mask using kind of those refine edge options in conjunction with your quick mask tool would be the best. You know, it's going to be up to you. The more you use Photoshop, the more you become familiar with making these selections, the easier it's going to be to say, here's what we're going to do. I think the best thing to do is just going to be use the quick selection tool and then refine this selection later. So I'm just going to go ahead and start painting over her and getting the best selection possible. And I'm going to go ahead and speed this up, and I will be back with a full selection in just a moment. All right, so that was pretty quick. I went ahead, I made the selection, got her all selected. I even cleaned up the edges a little bit. I went in a little bit with refine, the refining edge tools in Select and Mask. But I also, like with some of the straight edges on the watering can, I straight up went in with the polygonal lasso tool and just added to the selection and cleaned up the edges that needed to be cleaned up. And then what I did was I right-clicked on the selection and chose to save the selection. And you can see over here in my channels panel, I now have that selection saved as model. So I can always bring the selection up later if I need to. Now that we've done that, let's pop her up onto her own layer by hitting Command or Control J. You see that? She's up on her own layer now. There she is cut out. It does not, and I should emphasize this, it does not need to be an absolute pixel perfect selection for this effect. It really, really doesn't. As long as it's pretty close. I mean, obviously, the closer the better. Pixel perfect doesn't hurt, but, you know, don't kill yourself spending a huge amount of time making this perfect selection because you really don't need it to be perfect. You know, the better you can make the selection good, but it doesn't, by a long shot, need to be a perfect selection. So, all right, so we've got her up here on her own layer. I'm going to name this Stretch, and then I'm going to duplicate this layer, Command or Control J, and I'm going to name this Model. All right, and our background layer, let's turn that back on. Let's hide her. And maybe what we should do is just try flipping the background that we created and put it over on this side just to create one kind of large continuous background that's just there. So let's grab our rectangular marquee tool, make a selection over this. You know what? Actually, I'm going to grab my clone stamp tool and just get rid of these couple flowers real quick just so they're not in the way of our of us being able to create this background and make it as, you know, kind of close to perfect as we can. Boom, there we go. Hide that. And I'm just going to hide that as well. Again, it's not perfect, but we're going to cover it up here in just a second. So we're going to make this selection, bring it out to about there. Cool. We're going to go Select, Modify, Feather. Let's feather it again about, I don't know, 40, 50 pixels, something like that. And we're going to hit Command or Control J. We're popping that background up onto its own layer. Then hit Command or Control T. And we're going to right-click within the transform handles and choose Flip Horizontal. And then I'm going to drag it over to the side. And then what I'll do is I'll just drag it until it kind of meets up with the new background. There we go. And then we can hit Command or Control E to just merge those layers together. So again, it's a very pixelated background. We might want to desaturate it because I don't know if you can see. It looks like we're getting some like color noise in there. So if we hit Command Shift or Control Shift U, it's going to help neutralize any of that color that's appearing. Just give us a black and white image, and then we can bring her back, and she's still kind of on this background. So we've really kind of affected and changed the way this image looks already, and we haven't even actually started with the effect. So here's how the effect begins. There are a bunch of different ways that you can go about stretching or making an object in an image larger. I think with this image, I'm going to use the clone stamp tool because we don't just have a bunch of colors. They're actually flowers. This isn't like a flowing dress or just a black suit jacket that we're stretching out. I think I want to actually copy the flowers outward and create like this huge pattern of flowers. So let's grab the clone stamp tool right here. And I want a pretty large, not quite hard-edged brush. Yeah, hardness of 80% is probably great. And now what we're going to do is hold down our Alt or Option key, and we're going to select up here around this part of the image, and I'll just begin painting out here. Now, again, we're just looking to have a transfer of color and these flowers. It does not at all. It doesn't need to look, incredibly amazing. It just needs to sort of be in place. Whoops, that's a little bit too much. Let's begin down here. There we go. And then paint this up. And we're just looking at this point to start building out our pattern. And the bigger we build the pattern, the more we'll be able to sample from it later on. All right, great. Let's go down here to this part of the dress. And just paint out, extend this out. And I know we're literally copying the dress over. That's fine. And one of the things you could do is actually copy her right over. But But again, this allows me to kind of create and place dress elements exactly where I want them to be. It allows me to kind of flip, where some flowers are and all of that. Whoop, I didn't want to paint there. Keep messing this up. There we go. Let's bring this right over here. All right, I'm going to speed this up and just finish this off. Oh, hey, you know what? I actually want to take a quick break from this tutorial. Are you following me on Instagram? You should definitely check me out on Instagram. I post all kinds of prelude to tutorials, like, hey, here's the next video coming up that I'm working on, or here's some other crazy thing that's going on. Make sure you follow me on Instagram at Tutvid. So easy, Tutvid. The question isn't, why are you following me? The question is, why aren't you following me? Let's get back to the tutorial. All right, so now we're back. You can see that I've sort of recreated this entire pattern. Now, some of the other ways that you can do this if you don't feel like sitting here with clone stamp are, well, if I go to the car version of what I've created here and I shut off all of the masks, you can see here. There we go. By shift-clicking, I can shut off the mask, or right-click and just choose Disable Mask, which might be a little easier for me in this particular instance. You can see all I did was I took Free Transform and just distorted the living daylights out of the car. So I stretched it that way. So that's a little bit of a different way to stretch. I'm just going to go ahead and enable these masks once more. Let's turn those layers back on. Great. And then with the football player, what I did was, if I disable the mask, I'm going to shut him off. If I disable this mask, I went and just used Liquify. So I converted it to a smart object, and I used Liquify and just stretched the living daylights out of him. This is one of probably the easier ways to do this, is just go ahead and stretch all the colors out. And one of the reasons I did it in this case, but not the flower dress, is because you can see he has a lot of solid color. Now, one of the things I probably should have done was made a conscientious effort to get the greenish yellow color from his cleat stretched out with him. So when sort of we had the color exploding off of his foot, you had some green down there as well. That'd be the one thing I would go back and redo when I redid this image. But you can see solid color, so it makes it just a slam dunk. Go ahead and use Liquify. With the car, there are a lot of straight lines, so I thought, maybe just transforming it and distorting it out would be great. And now with the woman in the floral dress, it seems like cloning might be the best option for us. We'll get kind of the most detail in all of our little broken pieces. All right, so now that we've done that, we need to hide this entire layer. So we're going to go Layer, Layer Mask, and Hide All. So it's going to hide everything. We turn on our original layer, and now we have our model, and we need to mask her. We need to start making it look like a part of her is disappearing. Now, before we do this, we need to find some brushes. So let's go over to Google Chrome, and I'm going to show you my favorite website for finding brushes. All right, so here I am on this website, brusheasy.com, and I've just searched for Fragment, and sure enough, we have 7 different brush packs that have appeared. All of these are kind of purchased graphics through Shutterstock. You probably don't want to mess around with them. Plus, they're just not brush packs. But what you can do is just go ahead and download virtually any of these. I like to stick with brush packs that kind of look a little bit more organic than just being a straight bunch of circles and squares. But the reality is a lot of the disintegration brushes you're going to find are going to be circles and squares. You can mess around. You can create your own brush packs using textures, things like that. And also, one of the things you might want to look for are brush packs where the fragments are kind of spaced out, and these kind of very fine, sort of grungy disintegration brushes are one thing. But this effect also looks great if you use smoke brushes, if you use water brushes, if you use clouds brushes, and even if you use like a shattered glass kind of thing, where kind of the person's, the edge of the person is shattering, and then you get sort of this shattered effect where their body is coming back together. All of those types of brushes work amazingly with this effect and look really, really cool. Again, as we proceed through the tutorial, you're going to see one of the things you're going to want to watch out for is having too much graphic in one place. So if you have a brush that's not kind of spread out, like if there's tons of pieces of glass, when you create this effect and you keep painting and moving around, eventually it becomes very, very difficult to distinguish all the different bits of, like, let's say it's broken glass or whatever, because it starts to just look like a solid dress again. So that's the one thing you want to just beware of. And I'm sure we'll have to deal with it here when we're working on our image. So brusheasy.com, the keyword I searched for was fragment. I'm sure there's a bajillion other keywords that you could search for as well. So I'm going to load up my brushes. Once you download your brushes, you can load them into Photoshop. I'm going to place a mask on model. So I'm going to go Layer, Layer Mask, Reveal All. So it's going to be a white layer mask, great. And I'm going to bring up my brush tool. So the brush tool is right over here in the toolbar. And I'm going to right-click, and from this flyout menu, I'm going to choose Replace Brushes. So I'm going to replace all the brushes that are in there, and I'm going to load Disintegration Brushes Volume 2. So that's the one that I'm going to work with. Again, you don't have to work with this exact brush pack. Again, any brushes that you're going to load, as long as they're decently grungy or fragmenty or glassy or smoky or liquidy or whatever, they're probably going to work. Also, having big brushes helps as well. So here we go. We've got our brushes loaded, and we can just choose the first brush. Let's go with this one right here. Now, what I like to do, you can see this is a relatively large brush. What I like to do before I begin working on anything, especially, I mean, she's very slender. So if we go ahead and just start like clicking this, she's going to start disappearing very quickly. I'm going to undo what I just did. Number one, make sure the opacity of your brush tool, opacity and flow are both set to 100%. That's fairly important. There we go. The other thing I want to do is bring up my brushes panel. I like to keep this up because one of the things that we're going to be doing is not only selecting other brushes, but we're also going to be rotating the brush tip, resizing the brush tip. We might change the hardness a little bit, and we'll also be just straight up switching the brush itself and maybe even loading other brush packs depending on what we're doing. All right, so let's just size this down a little bit. Cool. And then I'm going to grab this arrowhead and rotate this brush so it's a little bit more, yep, like that. And I'm going to tick on shape dynamics here. I'm going to increase size jitter. Size jitter, what any of these jitters do is it basically is going to make Photoshop, allow Photoshop to make the brush head vary in size each time you click and apply a brush pattern. So it's going to sort of automatically make this shattered effect look a little bit more organic. That's what I like. I also want to turn on angle jitter and really crank that. Well, I'll crank it up a little bit, maybe 20-25% in this case. All right, let's go ahead. We're going to start painting. We're painting with black. Opacity of the brush tool is at 100%. And I'm going to start just painting away and making kind of this edge of her dress appear shattered. We're going to make this entire right edge appear like it's kind of shattered. I'm going to make the brush tip shape, or I'm going to click on brush tip shape. I'm going to make the size a little bit larger, maybe take it up to 1500, 1600, something like that. And I'm going to apply some of those into her body a little bit further. All right, something like that. I'll probably end up painting away the little bits that appear on her skin. I'm not sure how much I really like that. All right, let's go ahead there. I'm not going to mess around too much with her hair. This is mainly about the dress fragmenting, disappearing, appearing, whatever you want to happen down there. So I'm going to just paint away. All right, so we've done the first part of that, and that is making her begin to disappear, and we've done a pretty intense job of that. So let's now go down to the stretch layer, and we're going to paint with white to bring some of this dress back. Now, before I do that, I'm going to set my foreground color to white. Just hit that little arrow to flip the foreground and background colors. I am going to choose a different brush. I'll choose like this one here, and I'm going to go to Shape Dynamics. You can see size jitter and angle jitter are still there. I'm going to increase angle jitter to 100%. And what I like to do, and you can choose how you want to work this particular part of your brushing, but typically I like to start with small fragments. This is just generally speaking. I like to start with small fragments close to my subject. So we would have use a smaller brush close to her, and then the brushes would kind of the fragments, would get a little bit larger as they got away from her. You can flip that, make the fragments very large that are close to her, right? Like big pieces are breaking off of her dress, and they get smaller as they drift away. That certainly would make a lot of sense. Either one looks good. The key is you probably want to pick one and stick to it, so you get a more kind of natural look, specifically when it comes to this kind of fragmentation effect. So I'm going to stick with what I just said. I'm going to go with small fragments and kind of fade them out to larger fragments. So I'm going to make this brush size smaller under brush tip shape. Just scale this guy down. Maybe I'll make it like 5, 6, 7. I don't know. Well, you know what? I'm just gonna manually punch in 850. Let's go 850. There we go. And now I'm just going to paint here, all right? So you can see we've got all these fragments coming in, and now this is going to harken back to kind of exactly what I was talking about just a moment ago, where we have way too much graphic being laid down on the image. You can't, I mean, you're almost able to see the flower pattern like right down here, right? You can almost see those flowers appearing again. We're going to take care of that in a moment. Let's make this brush bigger. I'm just going to use the hotkey, the bracket keys. I'm going to bring it up to, I don't know, almost 2,000 pixels, and I'm going to press a couple times out here, right? So we've got kind of our bigger fragments exploding off of her and shooting way out over here. Now what I need to do is kind of lighten this up. There's too much graphic being poured into it. We're seeing too much of that effect underneath. So now all we need to do is flip our foreground and background color. We're painting with black, and just click through here a few times with black. It's going to kind of chop things up. It's going to make things a little bit more transparent. It's going to start getting rid of some of those little bits and pieces that we've created and give us a very fine effect. Now, once you've done this, obviously you may want to go back in with a large brush and just reiterate where you have some of your biggest bits of fragmentation happening. And you know what? Maybe what I'll do is I think I will switch up what I was saying and bring big fragmentation over here closer to the dress, and then it's just going to be smaller fragmentation that's happening way out here. So I'm going to include that, and now I'm again going to paint with black, make this brush a little bit smaller. I'm going to take it down to about 1500, and I'm just going to loosen up and lighten up what I see in here. Anywhere where I'm starting to kind of see the pattern of flowers coming back in, I really want to make sure I get rid of that, because that's going to be a problem for us. So I'm going to go back up here to her layer. I'm going to do away with some of the dress that's still kind of hanging out down there. And there, we've kind of completed the first part of the effect. You know what? I'm going to grab this 35 pixel brush. I'm going to make it a bit larger. Before I say that, I'm going to paint with the foreground color of white. I'm going to paint here over her skin. You can see we're just getting rid of those bits that are taking chunks out of stuff that we don't want chunks coming out of. All right, so her skin and her hair, they're in good shape. But you can see we've completed kind of, you could finish the effect right here, but we're going to go on and do something else with it as well. And that something else is going to be adding some depth. So like I said, you could essentially wrap your image up right here and be done with it. We've created a fragmenting effect. Her dress is kind of blowing off into outer space, or, you know, materializing around her, whichever you allow your imagination to play with. But let's go ahead and kind of create some larger chunks that are going to sort of try to appear like they're coming out of the middle of her, around her. We're going to begin first by kind of fragmenting a little bit of the right side of her dress. So I'm going to, again, bring up my brushes panel. I'm going to grab any one of these brushes. I can always, if the brush isn't quite the correct angle, I can always rotate the angle like we saw earlier. I'm going to make it quite a bit smaller here. I'm going to paint with the foreground color of black, and I'm going to come into here, and I'm just going to paint away some of the dress that's kind of going on down in here. All right, so it's going to be kind of a subtle effect, but it's definitely happening. It's fragmenting, and which means there's going to be some kind of fragmentation action happening over here on this side of her as well. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to move the brushes panel over here. It might be a little bit more out of our way. I'm going to duplicate this stretch layer. So I'm going to hit Command or Control J, and I'm going to move this up above the model layer. Now, I'm going to call this middle graphics or something. Yeah, just give it a name. It's just mid stuff. We're going to fill the mask with black, so I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and then backspace or delete, depending on whether or not you are Mac or PC. And what I want to do is grab one of these brushes. It's got to be a pretty large brush. I'm going to rotate it so it's a fairly flat graphic like this. I want to make sure my foreground color is set to white, so hit the little arrow, and then I'm going to click once here. All right, you can see it's going to bring some color graphic back in on that side. You know what also I might do? I might get rid of the angle jitter for a second, go back to brush tip shape, and just rotate this guy around. All right, and maybe throw a little bit more on that side, something like that. And then, of course, what I need to do is come in here and flip my foreground and background color again, because I want to break these graphics up a little bit. So I'm going to break these up, make them a little bit smaller. Certainly, as they fade away from her dress, I want them to be smaller so it kind of matches the other side. Right, so we just have a little bit of like an explosion of stuff from that side of her dress as well. Now what I want to do is flip my brush. So I'm going to hit Flip X, and it's going to bring me back up, right? Because that's just the way this brush is. Let's turn this down a little bit more. There we go. I kind of want it to look like it's coming out of this side of her now. I'm going to paint with white, so my foreground color, I hit the letter X, by the way, to quickly switch your foreground and background colors. I'm just going to click once over here. It's going to give me kind of this explosion of color. And at this point, we could make this layer a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. I still think there's a little bit too much color in here in the middle. I really don't want to see too much of the pattern coming through there, so I just want to make sure I break that up nicely. This whole point is just to almost add a very subtle swing of fragmentation in like this area of the shot, as if it's like a ring of fragmentation going around her. So once we've done that, great. We've created our middle graphics. And what we need to do next is duplicate this and create some blurred graphics. We're going to begin sort of faking depth, and then we're going to do our color treatment work, and we're also going to do sort of that swirling blur effect. So I'm going to show you how all that's done. Hit Command or Control J to just duplicate this. Again, we're going to select the mask and fill it with black. Now that I've done that, what I want to do is grab, whoop, I'm holding on my Alt key. I don't want to do that. I keep clicking it. There we go. We want to select our mask. We want to grab our brush tool once more. And I want a large brush. I actually want it to be larger than this. So I'm going to select, actually I want it to be a different brush altogether. Yeah, maybe this one. We're going to make it as big as we can make it, a 5,000 pixel brush. Now this is just the case for this image. Your image, you might not be able to, you might not need a 5,000 pixel brush, but this is a huge, remember this image, excuse me, is 8,000 pixels wide. So I'm going to set my foreground color to white, and I'm going to just click once, and it's going to bring back a bunch of big chunks of the dress. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to blur this layer. You could convert this to a smart object. I'm not going to, because I'm not going to be that picky about it. I don't want to lock my mask within the smart object. Or maybe I do. No, I'm just going to keep things simple. For the most part, you usually want to convert to a smart object, but I don't want to. I still want access to my mask right here very quickly. So I'm going to go blur, Gaussian blur, and I'm gonna zoom in because I really want to get a good look at this. I don't want it to be too blurred. 15 is too blurred. Maybe 4. That's decent. I still want these blocks to appear like they're fairly close to her. Let's go with 4, and then we're also going to blur. So we just blurred the contents of the layer, not the mask. If I Alt-Option-click the mask, you can see that, oh, you know what, that is actually blurred a little bit. I take that back. Maybe I did blur that a little bit. But I want to blur the mask a little bit more, so I'm going to select the mask and hit Command or Control F again. It's just going to blur the edges a little bit more, so that's great. And at this point, you could go ahead and just either reduce the opacity of this layer, if that looks like it would kind of make it look like they're fading away. You can go into your mask at this point with the brush tool again, right? And you could paint with black and just kind of break up a little bit of these these shapes that are blurred and floating around. Again, once you do that, you can see it's going to create this really nasty edged, see, like right in the middle of a blurred object, there's very hard edged stuff. So in order to get rid of that, just hit Command or Control F. It's going to reapply your blur, and it's going to specifically apply the blur to that layer mask, and it's just going to help blend that stuff together. So now even those fragments, like this big chunk of fragment here, it looks like that's even breaking apart. All right, so we've added our first sort of, I'm going to call this mid-blur. And now what we need to do is we're going to add sort of like a brightening blur and then one last blurred layer that's going to be like stuff that's way up in the foreground close to us. So let's duplicate our original layer. I'm just going to hold down my Alt-Option key and drag it right up there. I'm going to select the mask and I'm going to fill it with black, Alt backspace, Option delete. And now that we have this, I'm actually going to zoom. I'm going to temporarily disable the mask. So I'm going to right-click, Disable Mask, and I want to make this flowery stuff as big as the entire image. So Command or Control T, and let's just go ahead. Whoops, I don't want to click any Control, Command, Option keys. We're just going to drag it out. Don't even worry if it's proportionate. We still kind of have our flowers intact. All right, that's probably good enough. And we can just right-click and enable our layer mask once more. And what I want to do is, again, invoke the, well, let's bring up the brush panel again. But I want to use a huge brush once more. So I'm just going to tilt this brush. Any brush will probably work. Any of these fragmentation brushes certainly will work. So I'm going to go ahead and make this 5,000 pixels. I'm going to click once. I want to make sure my foreground color is white, though. Again, we want to reveal. We're looking to reveal the stuff on this layer. So click once, we reveal it. Great. At this point, what I want to do is right-click on my layer mask and choose to apply the layer mask. What this is going to do is it's just going to apply the mask to the layer, therefore erasing everything else. It's kind of like applying a layer mask is kind of like saying, hey, layer mask, I don't want you to be editable anymore. I want this to be applied to the graphics of this layer. This is going to allow us to do things like just blur this layer straight up right there and do all kinds of cool things with the layer in terms of, spinning blurs and any other blurs that we want to do. In this case, I'm doing it because I just want kind of a more compact graphic that I can transform and scale and make large, and I'm going to blur it anyway. So I don't mind if I lose a little bit of detail, and I kind of like where it is. So I'm going to hit Command or Control T, and what we're going to do is we're going to just scale this way up. You can see how I'm just stretching the daylights out of it here. There we go. Maybe I'll stretch it out this way, stretch it out that way. Cool. And we want to blur this. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and we're going to go Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And 4 is not enough. We probably want to go like 10 or 12, maybe 12. Again, this stuff would, in theory, be a little bit further away from her. So go ahead. Okay, that's great. We're going to apply that. And we're going to set this to a layer blend mode of, let's try screen. Yeah, I kind of like that. I'm going to reduce the opacity down to like 75, 80, 85, somewhere right around there. That's great. And now to this layer, we want to apply a layer mask. So we're going to choose the new layer mask icon. And I want to just hide some of the bits of this that are here in the middle. So you could use any brush you like. I'm going to use another one of these kind of fragmentation brushes, which means I'm going to have to blur the mask a little bit because, again, we're going to have very hard edges to this. But I just want to start revealing her dress and that stuff again. So I'm going to set my foreground color to black. Just flip them. Nice and easy. All right, we're going to go ahead and just open up the middle of our image once more. Again, these fragments are meant to be fragments that are kind of like swirling all around her, not necessarily covering her up. So, all right, so now that we've done that, let's go filter, blur, Gaussian blur. We're applying this blur to our mask. Go ahead, okay, great. So now we just kind of blur away some of that masking, but you can see very clearly her and her dress are coming through the middle kind of loud and clear. So that's great. Okay, so now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to duplicate the stretch layer once more. Well, we can duplicate the mid-blur layer, actually. No, you know what? No, we can't because that's blurred. What am I thinking? Hold down the Alt or Option key. Let's just drag this layer up. We're going to get rid of the mask altogether, and I'm going to hit Delete. Nope, we don't want to apply it. And we're going to free transform this Command or Control T, and we're going to just stretch this out, make it kind of as big as the image. We're going to end up stretching and blurring what we get out of this in just a second anyway. Go ahead and hit Enter or Return to commit that change. We're going to apply a layer mask, layer mask, and hide all. Just full black layer mask. Now we're going to grab any of these brushes. I'm actually going to use, I kind of like this brush that I have now. You can see it's kind of like long and thin, right? So it's just wide. I want something wide. This image is wide. So I'm going to make it 5,000 pixels in size. Again, I need a huge brush. Foreground color is set to white. I'm going to click once right in the middle. It's revealing just a chunk of graphics to me, a chunk of this fragmented colory mess. I'm going to right click on this layer mask and choose to apply this layer mask. All right, great. Now that we've applied the layer mask, we're going to Command or Control, you know what, I'm going to name this Foreground Blurred. That way I kind of know what this is. I'm going to hit Command or Control T, and I'm going to blow this up, and I need this to be big. So I'm going to really stretch this out, something like that. Maybe I'll search for just the right amount. Maybe something like that, so it's maybe only blurring the edges. You see how kind of like the top portion of the frame is pretty empty. It's going to be fairly devoid of blurred graphics. I think that'll even more make this look three-dimensional. Go ahead and hit the check icon. Now, there's a ton of wasted graphics all around. You can see it's going to even take a second for the transform to happen because it's a huge graphic we just created. Remember, this is only 8,000 pixels wide. So in order to quickly get this cleaned up, I'm going to hit Command or Control A to select all, and then just Command or Control J to pop that up onto its new layer. And the original foreground blurred, I'm going to select and just delete it, and then I'll rename this layer just foreground blurred. There we go. So now this layer is just this little bit, and what we're going to do now is we're going to blur this layer. Of course, you could convert this to a smart object. We could do that because we don't have a mask applied to it. For the sake of just staying uniform with what we're doing, I'm not going to do that. We're going to go Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and now we use 12 Gaussian Blur for the stuff that's in theory behind her. So this stuff is super close to us, so it should probably be like 65, something like that, maybe even more, maybe 85, something like that, okay? And you can see very, very blurred in the foreground. We can reduce the opacity a little bit because the stuff would appear semi-transparent at the very least. So now we have kind of her dress fragmenting, and we have all this stuff kind of collapsing around her. How do we go ahead and create that swirling effect, and then how do we do the color treatment to this image? So obviously, at any point along the way here, you can stop with this effect. I'm going to kind of go over and above. I'm going to do a ton to this photo, but you can stop anywhere you like and call it a day with the effect. I want to show you how to do everything here so you can pick and choose and do it your own special way to each and every one of your images or all the images that you want to apply this effect to. So we're going to go ahead and apply the color treatment, and we're going to do this kind of swirl effect. So let's take a look. I should actually mention before we go any further, you can create sort of a second one of these blurred foreground layers just to further reinforce, you know, this depth. So if we were to like duplicate this layer, Command or Control T, make it even larger, maybe right click and choose flip horizontal and drag it, you know, up over here or something, maybe even tilt it. and just really shade in the areas that need to be filled in a little bit, just to really sell the idea of this depth. And once again, because we free transformed it so much, Command or Control A, Command or Control J, pop it up onto its own new layer. Whoop, we selected both layers. I didn't want to do that. There we go. Select the original one, delete it, and we're going to name this one Foreground Blurred 02. This is why my tutorials always take so long, because I'm always freestyling off of what I should be doing. All right, so we've got our foreground. Now that I'm looking at her, I think we need to kind of fade away some of the dress down here a little bit more. It looks a little strange having so much of her fragmenting and then just this part of the dress down here still hanging on. So let's grab the brush tool. Let's open up the brush panel once more. We'll choose any one of these brushes, but I don't think we've used this one yet. And we're going to make sure under Shape Dynamics we've got some angle jitter happening. Size jitter is fine. Maybe it needs to be a little bit smaller than 2500 pixels. Let's make it like 1600 or so. There we go, something like that. All right, I'm painting with black. I'm down here on the model layer on the mask of that layer. So I'm just going to click a few times in here. We're really going to try to make this. Oh, I'm painting with white. So that's, of course, not going to do me any good. There we go. Now I'm painting with black. And I'm just going to really paint away to make this kind of, fragment. And now it's almost like as soon as we get rid of her connection to the ground, it's almost like she's floating in midair in this virtual world with her dress fragmenting and spiraling all around her. So speaking of spiral, let's create this spiral effect. We're going to merge all of our layers to a new layer. So Command Option Shift, that'd be Control Alt Shift, plus the letter E. It's going to merge everything to a new layer. Now, you may be thinking, oh no, this is so terrible. This is such a destructive effect. It is kind of destructive, but we're going to convert this to a smart object and apply a filter gallery blur to this so we can always go and tweak and adjust it as much as we want later. And I'm going to show you how this interacts with our image. It's kind of cool. Right-click on this layer. We're going to call this spinning or something like that. And right-click again and choose Convert to Smart Object. You can see it gets the little smart object icon. Great. Okay, so like I said, we've got our smart object here. We need to apply this particular spinning blur, but before we do that, I don't want it to be applied to her necessarily. So I want to go over to the Channels panel and Command or Control click on my model channel here. That's going to load that as a selection. I just straight clicked on it. I want to Command or Control click on it. You can see it loads it as a selection. Go back to the Layers panel. We actually want to invert this selection though because we want the blur to be applied to everything except her. So go Select, Inverse, and it's going to invert our selection. Great. We're up here on our spinning layer. We're going to go Filter, Blur Gallery, Path Blur. We're not using the spin blur, though. The reason we're using the path blur is because we have a lot more control over, kind of the way our path, our spinning blur will look using these paths. So I'm going to take this end of the path and put it like right here. And I'm going to take this end of the path and put it, like right here. And then we have this middle point, and we're going to drag that and pull it way over here. Okay, so you can see this is going to give us some pretty serious spin. Now that I've done that, I'm going to create a second path. So I'm going to click here. And then I'm going to click over here, and then I need to click this ending point once more to kind of place the point and lock it in, and I'm going to grab this center point and drag it way over as well, all right, so we can really, really tell, Photoshop, look, we want this thing to spin quite rapidly out from the center here. Now, part of the reason I should say that I'm using path blur, not spin blur, and part of the reason I'm laying the paths in like this is because I don't want this blur to look like a blur that's on screen like this. I want it to look like a blur that's spinning this way, right? As if it's like a hula hoop going around her. So we don't want it to look like a wheel turning in front of her. So we need to lay those paths down flat to give that illusion of that depth, you know what I mean? So that's why I'm laying these paths down. We could apply another path, and by the way, it looks like it's blurring her now. It's not, don't worry. I'm going to apply a path right here, and I know this looks crazy. I'm just going to click to apply that, and then I'm going to drag this point way over here. So this is just going to kind of pull our blur up and around, and you can click on your path, by the way, at any point and just apply another point. So I'm going to just pull this out. I'm going to pull this over, and if things start to look too crazy, you can just get rid of a line. In fact, if this looks too bizarre here, I'm just going to ditch this line. I think it is. I'm going to hit the delete key. Just get rid of that whole path. Delete once more. And there we go. We've gotten rid of the path. There's even a little bit of kind of discrepancy between the two paths here that I don't necessarily love, but I can live with. So there we go. We're going to go ahead and hit the OK button. And what's going to happen is Photoshop's going to take a second. It's processing a very CPU-intensive blur to remember an image that's 8,000 pixels wide. So I'm going to give it a second here to just process, and then we're going to jump into talking about color grading, and then we're finally going to be done with this effect. And actually, by the way, this whole tutorial, at any point along the way, like I think I mentioned earlier in the video, you can stop. So if this is way too much for you and you think this is ridiculous, well, just stop at the very first step where you just get the fragmenting effect. And it's amazing. You'll still get a really cool effect. All right, so here we are back in Photoshop. We have our image. It looks like just a mess, though. What we need to do is drag this all the way down to the bottom, just above our background, so all of our new, fragmenty stuff can appear above this. And then one of the things I even like to do is go ahead and just maybe reduce the opacity of that layer, whatever it takes, so you still have kind of the influence of the spin, without having like that weird haloing effect that you can see kind of happening. So you might need to play around with it a little bit, maybe toy around with the path blur. Remember, it is a smart object, so we can go into that blur gallery and really play with our path blur, get the exact blur that we need for the effect that we're going for. In this case, I don't necessarily like the spin that we got, so I'm just going to shut that layer off. Maybe I'll tweak it and play around with it later, but let's not spend too much time on that. That is how I would apply the spin, but I'm not necessarily digging how it's working with the pattern of, all the fragmenting that we created with this image. Some images it works, some images it looks amazing, some it's just, not quite there. But that's part of the beauty of this effect. It's literally different, totally different just about every single time you do it. In fact, we'll compare this image to the image that I showed you at the very beginning of the tutorial just to see two different versions of me even doing it, how different it looks. All right, let's talk about all of the kind of changing color. So we're going to go ahead with vibrance. We're going to use a vibrance adjustment layer, and I'm going to pump the vibrance like plus 85. I mean, I want a ton of color pumped into this. So there's before, there's after. So it's already looking so much more vibrant and rich and colorful. That's great. We're also going to go and apply a selective color adjustment layer. I'm going to work from the drop-down menu first in the blacks. I'm going to remove maybe just a tiny bit of the blacks. Well, that's way too much. Maybe just like -1, -2. I'm going to remove some of the yellows, which is going to pump blue into that area. I'm going to introduce more magenta. Not too much, though. Be careful there. And I'm also going to introduce just a little bit of red. So you can see two layers, and we've dramatically changed the color already. And we're not even done here with selective color. Now in selective color, go up to neutrals. Let's again pour just a couple more drips of blue into there, a couple more drips of magenta into there, and maybe, I don't know. I think I actually like a little bit of cyan. Again, this is all just a personal taste. And let's go up to whites, excuse me. We're going to throw more yellows into the whites to try to make her skin look a little more golden and rich. Maybe magenta, green, maybe a little bit of green, actually. And then cyan versus red. I think I want to put red. Red, by the way, is the opposite of cyan. So when you drag out cyan, it's going to give you red. When you drag away magenta, it's going to give you green. When you drag away yellow, it's going to give you blue. That's why I'm kind of talking like that to myself. All right, now that we've done that, we need to just increase contrast. We can do this with a simple curves layer, just a simple S curves, right? Let's just bump and bump. All right, it's just a nice S curve on a curves layer, before, after. It's a nice little kick of contrast. And I think let's go with a color balance adjustment layer here. Let's work with the shadows first. I'm going to increase the blues and the shadows. This is really going to give us intense and rich color. Whoa, that's way too much. Took a second to catch up with me there. All right, let's go magentas a little bit. Cyan, red. I kind of like the red in the shadows. That's kind of cool. Midtones. Let's go with a little blue. Again, a little bit of magenta. I think I'll go a little cyan there in the midtones. Highlights. Again, let's try with yellow. Yeah, I definitely like yellow in the highlights more. Maybe just a kiss of green in the highlights, and then probably just a touch of red in the highlights as well. So you can see color balance is really kind of blowing things out of the water. We can reduce the opacity of that layer if we like. And if it's still not colorful enough for you, you can always throw another vibrance saturation adjustment layer and pump the vibrance up even more. I think that's maybe a little bit too much for this image. In fact, I'm just going to delete that vibrance adjustment layer altogether. But you can see here we've created this kind of crazy effect that began with just that girl standing there with that flower dress on. Now, let's take a quick look at the before image and then the after image, and you'll really see how much difference we made. And again, remember, for the third time, I want to stress, you don't have to go this far. That's the beauty of these adjustment layers and breaking everything down into the layers. Do it as far as you want to do it. Do it as far as it looks good for your project. That's why you're the designer, and I'm just the guy who sits here and talks about Photoshop. All right, so here's this one that we just did on the video. Here is the image before. Whoa, hello. Let me zoom out. So you can see how dramatically different this one looks from the one that we just did. I mean, literally, like totally different images. There's way more blue in this image. There's way more red and pink in this image. This swirl is very well defined in this image. We didn't do any swirl. In fact, let's see what happens if I turn the swirl on. You can see it kind of just makes it look like there's motion, which actually isn't too bad. It kind of makes it look like everything's blowing by her and sticking to her dress almost. But I kind of still think I'd prefer it without that. Now that I'm looking at the other image, I really think we need to pump up the magenta and the red in the midtones and really give this more of a pink look. I really dig that pink magenta look. But you can see two totally different images. I mean, I just did this one a couple hours before starting to record, and now this one here while we were recording. So you truly can get very, very different effects using this particular technique. But the whole point and the whole like quick rundown of what you want to do, separate your subject from the background and fill in the background where the subject was. Remember when I first got on camera and said it's easiest to do people over studio backgrounds, but you can do people over more complex backgrounds. You just want to be able to fill in behind them, so when you start masking them away, when you start fragmenting their body, it's not showing through to transparency, but instead it's showing through to true blue background. And then, of course, you mask and reveal fragmented parts of the stretched image, which you stretch over. That's the basic concept at the heart of this whole effect. After that, adding blurred layers and additional layers and spinning layers, all of that is totally up to you and your taste and how far you want to take the effect. So, for spinning, blurred, 3D pixel dispersion explosion effects in Photoshop, boy, was that a mouthful. That's it. Get it? Got it? Good. NathanielDoddsonTutvid.com. I'll catch you in the next one. Well, I have nothing more to say. I'm literally out of words after that tutorial. The only thing, I guess, a couple more words. Please go ahead and hit the like button. Smash the like button. Crush the like button. Subscribe to this channel as well. You'll never miss another one of these video tutorials ever. And if you sign up for my newsletter, boom, a link just appeared there on the top of the screen. If you sign up for that, not only will I send you a course, 30 free tips and tricks on how to work faster in Photoshop right away when you sign up, but you'll also get the best of the best of the best each month when I send out my newsletter. You're absolutely going to love it. You can also follow me on Snapchat. You can follow me on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook so you can keep tabs on my day-to-day activities as well. Love you guys. I'll catch you in the next video.